Iraqi leaders and go ahead and get right out of there within about 4 to 6 months, maybe. It cost $50 to $80 billion was the thinking. About 3 months into that, we did a complete 180. And secretly, a few men in Washington, D.C. made some decisions. There were about 4 of them, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, probably Fife. Very, very, very foggy information on that, but there were 4 of them. They did not consult with the CIA. They did not consult with the FBI, counterterrorism, any government officials currently running Iraq. They did not consult with the military on the ground in Baghdad, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or State Department, or the President. They made these decisions. What they did is they hired a new guy. His name was Paul Bremer, Jerry Bremer, and only 10 days before he left for Iraq did they hire him. He was in D.C. for 10 days, and then he took off to basically be in charge in Baghdad. He had 5 specific decisions that he was given by these 4 people. This is the key point of the war that puts it all in perspective. If we had stuck with that original plan, we could have been out of there in 4 to 6 months, and the war would have been over. We would have had no war. Good God, how would Halliburton make money? Can't have that. So we came in with these 5 decisions. The first decision that we had is we decided not to stop the looting that was going on. Now keep in mind, Baghdad is 6.5 million people. Los Angeles is just a little less than 4 million people. So if you can imagine the entire city of Los Angeles with no police, no army, no security whatsoever, what in the world would happen? Good God, I think we'd have looting. You'd kind of know that if you remove the security from an area that had that many people, you're going to have some problems. But we had decided to go in with a much smaller military than was needed. Military officials had said that we needed at least 200,000 troops. Donald Rumsfeld wanted 100,000 and no more. He fought with them for quite a long time. They ended up, I think, with 140. And so we had no troops to take care of looting. So what happened, Baghdad actually experienced $12 billion worth of looting, which was their GDP for 2 years in a row. Museums, everything was looted. The second thing they decided to do was fire all government employees, including teachers and librarians. Absolutely everyone. So they all were immediately fired. The third thing they decided, that Bremer decided to do, and this was the most controversial, was to fire the entire army. Now, the army had already been wanting to come back and now aid in the future of the country. We thought we were going to have democracy or some kind of freedom or, some kind of liberty or something. Anyway, and in fact, 2 days before Bremer left, President George W. Bush had said to keep all of the battalions in down, so about half of the army at least he had wanted to keep. And those men were there and they were ready to go. They were immediately fired by Bremer. Now what happened then is we had 500,000 unemployed men with no way to feed their families. And these men often supported extended families because the job situation there was fairly difficult. So they're not only able not to feed their families, but extended family. And it ended up with 27% as a conservative estimate unemployment in Baghdad. So you have 27% unemployment, and what else did we decide to do? Oh darn, we're not going to guard the munitions. So we had 3 tons of live munitions, which these guys knew where they were, and they came and carried those away. We had no ability, the soldiers were just standing around going, oh well, that's not our job. And the last thing that they did not do is provide any security on the streets whatsoever. If you can imagine being a city of 6.5 million people with an unemployment level of almost 30, probably 30%, and 3 tons of munitions have been sent out into that population. Ooh, we're going to have a little bit of trouble. This is not a good idea. I mean, I can't imagine that anyone in their right mind would think that any of those were good ideas. But the one thing they did provide is a long and extended war and a lot of work for the private contractors who came after. One last point on Bremer. There was a National Intelligence Council report. The National Intelligence Council is part of the CIA. It was an estimate on Iraq and what would happen in the insurgency. It was a 13-volume report. It took up a whole shelf. Bush never read any of it. He never even read the one-page executive summary. He had absolutely no desire to read anything or do anything different than what they were doing. So what happens now is we have private contractors coming in. Remember, Dick Cheney thought of this idea back in the Gulf War. In the Gulf War, the ratio of private contractors to contractors was 60 to 1. 60 soldiers to 1 private contractor. The ratio in the Iraq War is 1 soldier to 1.4 private contractors. So we have more private contractors now than we have regular soldiers. Very interesting. In 2008, there were 160,000 military, 200,000 contractors, and 48,000 armed civilian guards. So that was a big change, and that was something specifically that Dick Cheney had started long, long ago. The U.S. spends $2 billion a week in Iraq. 40 cents of every dollar that Congress controls goes to private contractors. It's amazing. All private contractor profits are undisclosed. Cash from America was brought in on pallets and handed out off of pallets, and actually 200 pallets were lost by Halliburton at the time. Some of the bigger companies that are working there right now, Bechtel has a $2.3 billion contract, and even though it failed to complete it, it was still paid the total. KBR has a $32 billion contract. That's 5 times the cost of the Gulf War just for KBR. Parsons has a $5 billion contract and completed only 6 of the 142 health clinics that it was supposed to build. Halliburton has an at least $10 billion contract, $1.8 billion of which is completely unaccounted for, and they just doggone don't know what they did with it. The original projected cost of war was 50 to 80 billion. Right now, the value of contracts that we have is 300 billion over 5 years, and 40% of all department contracts are no-bid contracts. So these are no-bid contracts that also have something called cost plus. So the idea here is the more money that you spend, the more money you make. If you spend a lot of money, you make a lot of money. Sounds like a really great way to save money, doesn't it? Okay. Another thing to remember, contractors in Iraq are not under any kind of law. They're not under Iraqi law, and they're obviously not under American law. They're able to do anything that they want. They can murder innocent civilians there, and they cannot be held accountable for that. Up to a year after we went into the Iraq War, Bush was completely unaware of this. He was asked about this at a news conference, and he basically laughed and made a joke of it. And at that time, 15 Iraqi citizens had been murdered by American contractors, and there was absolutely nothing that could be done about it. The CEO of Titan in 04 and 05, his salary was $47 million. Titan hires untrained and untested interpreters. The CEO of Khaki, Khaki was hired for clerical and IT work. They ended up being employing civilians as interrogators at Abu Ghraib. Those interrogators were found to be guilty of heinous acts of torture. The military that were involved in that incident are spending years in prison. The private contractors who were involved in that incident got away scot-free. And the CEO of Khaki made $22 million in 04 in personal income. The CEO of Halliburton in 03 made $47 million. Remember, that's just directly right straight out of our pockets. Oh yeah, that's taxpayer money. They cut services at every opportunity to enhance their profits. They spoiled their staff with fleets of new upgraded SUVs for employees who never drove. Remember, the more they spend, the more they make. They put employees up in 5-star hotels with 5-star meals while the Army slept in moldy tents. If a computer or a truck lost a part or popped a tire, it was burned because they didn't have extra parts. They couldn't think that far ahead. So they were burning $80,000 trucks in front of starving Iraqis. This is the idea of democracy, I guess, that we're bringing. We're going to bring freedom, right? 63 of their 67 water treatment plants. Now remember, this is Cheney's old company. 63 of their 67 water treatment plants were contaminated with malaria, typhus, and giardia, and more than that, actually. They kept a feeding schedule of the troops of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and made the troops stand out in the desert for an hour at a time, waiting for food as sitting ducks, because they wouldn't go to a 24-hour feeding schedule because it cost them too much money. They would charge the Army $100 a bag for laundry and return the laundry in worse shape than it came in, but the soldiers were required to do their laundry through Halliburton. It was illegal to do it yourself. They charged taxpayers for convoys carrying nothing, and I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. Blackwater is another company that was in Iraq. 4 contractors were killed because of Blackwater negligence. They rolled a convoy in a day when they never should with they didn't follow the requirements, and it was a red day. No one should have been on the street.